The budget was announced last week and it really did prove to be a mixed bag. Whilst it did attempt to try and address some major challenges and made some attempts at tax reform, Rachel Reeves was too scared to go as far as was necessary to address the challenges that our economy faces. I will break down what the budget really means for the future of our economy and whether Labour has done enough to address the challenges that we face. And the scale of the challenge is real. So, this is Mission Underground. The first thing that the budget focused on was infrastructure investment and the industrial strategy. The right type of infrastructure investment was chosen, with projects focused on northern areas like Leeds and investment in nuclear energy, which I've talked about previously. Clean energy investment and increased funds for renewables will be good for green growth and net zero ambitions. The Northern Growth Corridor will unleash the potential of our urban centres in the north, like Leeds and Manchester, which have been neglected for far too long. Investments in broadband access will also help to improve social mobility, productivity, and economic growth, a much needed change that was necessary to help rural areas develop further. £2 billion has been allocated to potholes, and tangible progress has been already made in communities. Pothole repairs have already increased by 15% since Labour came to power, and this will support the effort further and increase support for Labour in beleaguered communities and amongst the begrudged electorate. Investments in AI and data centres have largely been concentrated in the North and Midlands, which will help to create new industries in declining areas and confront the effects of globalisation and post-industrialisation, which is leading to the decline of communities in the North. This will increase social cohesion and revive these neglected communities with new forms of employment. However, Labour does need to be taxed less to reduce the extent of technological unemployment. Additionally, we also need a green industrial revolution in these industrial heartlands. We don't just need AI to power the revolution of new jobs in these beleaguered areas. We also need net zero to provide jobs in renewable energy industries. Reforms to the R&D system are a brilliant measure that will encourage growth and innovation. For far too long, the intellectual property system has been restricting growth and innovation in the country. What Labour has done, trade deals, the industrial strategy, and the reforms from the budget will be good for growth in the long term. The scrapping of the de minimis trade rule will also support local producers and exporters, who are being outcompeted by unethical fast fashion brands like Shein and Temu. This rule allowed them to easily and cheaply flood their products into the UK. Now that it has been scrapped, local producers will be able to be supported more easily. Reduced business investment relief, however, will damage productivity, and that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Considering tax reform, the minor attempts at tax reform are not enough to solve the scale of the problem. Deeper tax reform would have helped tackle the problems we have with growth and inequality, and a big opportunity has been missed by Rachel Reeves. Reeves received a better fiscal position than she expected, and the tax rises chosen were mostly political choices. She had far more freedom than she would like you to believe. However, the lack of radical change means we will see a meager boost to growth and living standards, far below what is required and needed to improve the conditions that we are facing. Freezing tax thresholds and maintaining fiscal drag is going to damage working people and erode people's standard of living even further. Reeves herself, merely a few years ago, said that this policy was wrong and unjust. Income tax needs to be reformed, and she has failed to take the necessary action to support people into work and improve living standards by reshaping the tax system. She has also neglected wholesale reform of council tax, which was floated to the media weeks before the budget, and a regressive and outdated system based on 1991 property values still remains today. However, the mansion tax is a welcome measure to help level the playing field when it comes to asset taxation. Other measures also rightly narrow the gap between income and asset taxation. Other measures, such as wealth taxes on increased dividend taxes and other measures like that, will help narrow the gap between income and asset taxation. However, the lack of tax cuts for working people will make it difficult to reduce inequality substantially, despite the changes to the welfare system that have been introduced, such as increased universal credit. Labour needs to reclaim the middle class if it wants to win the next election. Tax cuts for the middle classes and tax rises for wealthy asset owners is the only way that they can do this. Higher taxation of property income is also a good measure that will help to free up assets and level the playing field in terms of earnings between the wealthy and the lower classes. However, stamp duty on second homes was not increased, but it should have been, because we need people to access their first houses, not investors to get multiple properties under their belt to take home unethical profits. Stamp duty reserve tax has been rightly reformed. This was choking activity in the stock market, and now an exemption has been introduced for UK listed companies, which will aid investment and business growth. However, this tax should be scrapped because it serves absolutely no purpose, once again, like the actual stamp duty tax. This is a crucial measure to foster innovation and enterprise whilst protecting emerging companies and infant industries. If we continue to maintain this tax, our stock market will be far less competitive than international competition. Business rates have also been reformed and reduced to offer relief to small businesses, whilst targeting large conglomerates like Amazon. However, some issues have emerged with this, and if we want to support enterprise and confront the economic impacts that we are seeing, then we need to combine the industrial strategy and business rates reform to support small businesses rather than hurting them with increased taxation. These extreme increases that have been reported by some pubs and other businesses will be damaging for business activity, and this is a problem that needs to be resolved. Botching delivery will damage the perception that people have of the government. Whilst the electric car tax is not really beneficial because we do want to direct people towards electric cars, this will likely disincentivize people from buying them. It is not that high a threshold, and we do need something to replace fuel duty as a taxation on car use because fuel duty is obviously going to be obsolete once the switch to electrics is complete. So, this is a long term measure that will help change the tax system in the right direction. Gambling taxes are also a good measure from the budget. This will help to reduce addiction and negative social impacts, as well as unethical profits that gambling firms continue to rake in on astronomical levels each year. Oil and gas profits will also be taxed more heavily when prices are high to prevent unethical profits being made from high bills, an increasingly prevalent problem that we've seen since the COVID crisis. Increased dividend taxes will also narrow the gap between working people and investors in terms of income. These measures are good for reforming the tax system and supporting working people. Of course, as a committed campaigner for social justice, I will always support higher private jet taxes due to their hefty environmental impact and their status as luxury goods and playthings for the wealthy. Expanded carbon taxes will also help the net zero transition, which is being stalled by doubts that are being stirred up by right wing provocators. One measure that was shelved after intense lobbying was an increased bank levy. This ideally should have been done because increased profits and gains from quantitative easing were not justified and they needed to be taxed because now banks are raking in astronomical levels of profit without having any accountability or tax to pay for these excess profits. Increased savings income tax will also help to encourage economic activity and consumer spending. Much needed reforms to ISAs have also been introduced. Reduced ISA tax relief will also help to stimulate spending rather than hoarding and accumulation of wealth. But the fact that it is exempt for over 65s will help accelerate the trend towards a gerontocracy. Why does society favor old people so much? This is an unjust measure. And now we have a two-tier system rather than a holistic and standardized system. We should not have this exemption for over 65. Older people are already more cash rich and should be discouraged from savings. Rather than having them accumulate wealth, we should encourage them to spend it. Labour's planning reforms should continue to help house building, whilst increasing department funding should continue to help improve public services and cut NHS waiting lists. However, funding settlements could have been increased more than they actually were. New neighbourhood health centres will truly bring care back into the community and restore community based healthcare and create a stronger shift towards preventative care. New reforms, such as online GPs and a transformative 10-year health plan, will finally create an NHS fit for the future. In terms of welfare reform, the cruel two-child benefit cap is finally gone, lifting thousands of children out of poverty. This will be and should be a defining legacy for this government. Best Start hubs and a much needed child poverty strategy has rightly become Labour's defining mission. And if they succeed in tackling the most grotesque, most sordid form of poverty, it will be remembered and exalted for generations to come. Rebalancing universal credit rates is also a welcome measure, as the current system doesn't help encourage people into work, and it's not useful for ensuring that large firms pay appropriate wages. The welfare state is being appropriately and compassionately reformed by the Labour Party, while still supporting people with above inflation increases to rates. The Youth Guarantee, recently introduced as well, will also be good for helping to resolve the needs crisis and for giving young people a stake in their future. This will finally help to resolve the high levels of youth unemployment that we have currently and give young people a hope for the future and an avenue for growth in their lives. The measures in the budget have been complemented by a new transformative national youth strategy. Finally, government is listening to young people, but we still need to rebalance the system to favor old people less and support the needs and the difficulties that young people face. Reclaiming money from asylum hotel contractors is the right thing to do. They have failed to provide safe and comfortable accommodation, and the state should not be subsidizing their obscene levels of profit so heavily. Visa reforms will encourage global talent and innovation to be based in Britain. Various new talent visas will support research and development in our world leading universities and life sciences sectors. The levy on overseas students will be harmful, however, for innovation and growth, and this will damage our crippled universities' finances even further. The only consolation is that the levy is quite small in relation to the scale of tuition fees that international students have to pay. In terms of the green transition and environment, the scrapping of green levies to lower bills is something that I can cautiously support, as long as support for green schemes isn't reduced. The Warm Homes Plan and the Warm Homes Discount have also been extended. This highlights how the budget is helping to support the most vulnerable people in society, but the middle classes will continue to be squeezed. Sin taxes increasing on vaping and alcohol will support better public health and reduce the negative social impacts, just like the gambling taxes. The phased increases to fuel duty manages cost concerns, whilst also helping to accelerate the shift to electric cars. This is a much needed change that has been delayed due to continued lobbying by the motor lobby and industry. This is a change that was desperately needed, and finally, the Chancellor has been brave enough to introduce. Increased devolution funding should help prevent poverty and improve the quality of public services. Devolution is necessary to improve the quality of the state and help narrow the regional gap between London and the south versus the north. The crackdowns on dodgy nail bars and the Pride in Place program will help revitalize communities that are being hampered by the high rates of shop closures and unemployment. It will help confront the astronomical costs that the state faces from illegal money laundering, which amounts to £12 billion per year. Unfortunately, the government has failed to destroy the Tory fiscal rules, and we remain trapped within the straitjacket of neoliberalism and a failed economic model. Without radical changes, the scale of improvement that we need to see will be vastly diminished. The scale of improvement that is being tailed by the Labour government will be vastly diminished, as spending will remain tight towards the end of the parliament. We need to fund the future. We need to fund our priorities. And whilst this is not austerity, it is not enough to confront the problems that we face either. The triad of tragedy, however, the OBR, the Treasury, and the Bank of England, is being subtly reformed. There will now be only one budget per year by law, and the OBR will only produce one fiscal forecast. This will bring much needed stability within the current framework. The most disgraceful thing, however, were the personal attacks on Rachel Reeves by Kemi Badenoch in the chamber. These were absolutely disgraceful, and they were rich coming from someone who supported the Liz Truss mini budget and someone who wants to put Britain on the same level as Russia and Belarus by withdrawing us from the ECHR. If it wasn't clear before which leaders we desperately do not need, it is definitely clear now. Overall, the budget will go some way to restoring trust, fairness, and meritocracy to the system. Labour is somewhat returning to Labour values, and I'm delighted to support the budget and its measures mostly. However, despite the progress that has been made, it does not embrace the radical measures that are necessary to fundamentally reshape society and drastically improve living standards whilst reducing inequality, and that is the budget's biggest downfall. This could significantly threaten Labour's position come the next general election if results and delivery are not demonstrably achieved. If Keir Starmer wants to keep his job, if Labour wants to stop reform, they need to be more radical in the way that they're approaching the budget, and I hope that they do so next time round.